Hi guys, I'm Danny, and I started a Sunday gym because I've noticed lately that people tend to go to colleges and universities without actually knowing why they're there. Afterwards, starting jobs that are unfulfilling. So I'm interviewing different professionals to see what they have to say and share their knowledge and experience with you. I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, it seems all right. Good. Right on. Ethan, hello, and thank you for being with me. How are you doing today?
Very well. Thank you for having me, Danny.
It's an absolute pleasure, and you're gonna have a lot to say. The program will be focused on three main questions. What do you do for a living? How did you get there? And how did you know that this was the way to go? So, tell us what you do for a living, please.
Sure. I'm a retired professor. I used to teach chemistry, and I'm now a book author. I've been writing books for the last 10 years or so. I've got two major publications and working on a third.
That's pretty interesting. So, were you like walking on the street one day and you were like, "Let me be a professor in chemistry," or did something else led to it?
No, not at all. And I think if I understand right, your podcast is directed at young people who are on their way to college or entering college, but a little uncertain about their direction. Is that right?
That was the original target group, but turns out that there are a lot of other people, and some of them aren't exactly young, but they are in the same situation.
Yes, and I think throughout our lives, and I completely understand the topic. Throughout our lives, we struggle for direction. We struggle sometimes for a meaning in life, for a purpose, for something we wish to do. And I think often we feel trapped. Often we get into a rut. We get stuck somewhere where we're not entirely happy. And sometimes, life has to give us a jolt to get out of that. Sometimes we have to do it ourselves. And I just want to say, before we begin, I've I've enjoyed a number of different careers, a number of different directions. Life for me has been a very random walk. And as I said, I have two books. One is a chemistry textbook, which I don't think your listeners are going to be so into unless they're going into chemistry.
One never knows.
Yeah, exactly. No, but the second book is a novel. It's called The Trail. And I'm an avid backpacker. I've been a backpacker for years. You can 30 years. You can see the background here up in
Yeah.
the Sierra Mountains. And at age 50, I took a trip on the John Muir Trail, a 28-day hike through the woods. And it was amazing to me. It was just, I'd done so much backpacking, but I'd never experienced being out that long. And although I'd written a chemistry book, I turned around, took a different direction, and wrote a novel. And I think the novel would be of particular interest to your listeners because it's about a young man who is in a rut. His father has died. He dropped out of college. His life is going nowhere. He's stuck in LA, in Los Angeles, basically in a dead end job, chasing meaningless hookups with women, but doing nothing with his life. And he gets sort of a call to adventure from Sid, an older retired philosophy professor from Berkeley who's dying of cancer and whose dream, his whole life, his dream has been to hike this trail through the Sierra. And so Gil goes and joins Sid on this trek, and he's transformed. Being out in the wilderness for 28 days really, really changes his perspective on life and, takes him out of his rut and moves him forward. And I think your listeners would get a lot out of that book. Now, I'm not suggesting that your listeners need to go into the woods for 28 days in order to find a direction in life. Although I've got to say, from my own experience, time in the wilderness, time in nature is fantastic for self reflection, for meditation, for just putting down the cell phone, getting out of the rut, and having time to reflect. And I think that's one of the messages I'd want to put to your listeners is in order to really figure out what it is you love, what your passion is, sometimes you need to step out of your life. You need to do something a little different. By way of example, okay, going into the wilderness is one. When I finished graduate school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Yes, I knew I loved teaching. I knew I loved science and teaching and reading, and I knew I wanted to be in academia. But I took a year and a half off and I traveled to mainland China, which was
Very
pretty remote
interesting.
in those days. Yeah, no, it was very different. It
Which year
was
was
China.
that? Roughly.
That was back in 1993, if I recall. So
All right.
it's long before China developed into
Yeah.
the modern, economic powerhouse it is now. It was fairly poor. It was an early transition back in the 90s. People still had blue suits and rode bicycles.
Yeah, my
And
mother was there at that time, roughly, so I know.
yeah, no, it's an amazing experience. It was for me. And that time out, that doing something different really gave me time to reflect on my life. It gave me time to grow, to meet new people, and go in different directions. And just like my trip through the woods did, it inspired me to write a novel. And I'd never written fiction before. I'd written nonfiction, but never fiction. But I really wanted to get across this kind of meaning of life thing and share what I had learned in the woods with others. And what I want to say to your listeners is exactly that. I've taught college for years, and I'd say 75% of the students I have there, and it's unfortunate, but 75% don't know why they're there. They're there
The
because,
number is approximately the same in Europe. And
yep,
to be honest, that's why I made that podcast. And that's why I'm gathering those examples.
yes,
Because
and
it,
people need to
it
hear this.
yeah,
Yep, no, people need to hear this message that you don't just have to get on a track and follow it through your entire life. You don't have to do what people tell you you have to do. That's a mistake. You need to do what you love. You need to follow your passion. And there are moments in life, every now and then, where something speaks to you and it says, wouldn't it be interesting to do this or that? Like it did for me with, going to the woods or going to China. It's going to be a different voice for you. Everyone is different. But I'd say only about 25% of the students I've taught really want to be there. There are people who know, and they know it from a young age. Hey, I want to be a doctor. I want to cure people. And that's great. And those students are wonderful. They know why they're there, and they're getting the full benefit out of college. You're paying a lot of money for college. You should
yeah,
do it
that's
there.
I've heard that about the US. Like for example, here in the EU, about 95% of the universities and colleges are like ridiculously cheap. Like, for example, I graduated a private college, right? And I'm one of the, I mean, I didn't knew that, but turns out I was in the minority here because I was 15 or 16 when I knew exactly what I want to learn, what I want to study, what I want to do for a living. And I've been doing it since I was, yeah, ever since I graduated. Uh, the podcast side, I'm an accountant and a financial analyst. It's what I do. And I thought everybody would like that. Turns out it won't.
No,
And
most students don't know what they want to do. Most
which is
students,
a huge problem. But like for example, I graduated a private college. I worked as a bartender and I
mhm,
paid everything and I still had money on the side. And I wasn't a bartender for the Saudi Arabia king, right? I was like normal bartender with normal salary. That's
yep,
but I know it's an issue in the US about the money, but then again, I'm certain that you have lost the money at some point in your life. So have I, so has everybody. It's not that much about the money, but it's about the time. Because you're losing a lot of,
yes,
especially for a young person. Like here, the bachelor is about 4 years, and then the master is about 2. So if you are to do all of them, it's like 6 years. Now, you take a young person, and young person, if you're like 18, 19, and you take between 4 or 6 years of their life, most of them, not all, not all, but most of them don't even work during that time because they have to study. And we end up with about 25-year-old young adults, because in my opinion, those aren't children anymore. Those are young adults. And as you said, the huge majority of them don't know what they're doing. They don't know why they're there. This is not an insult, by the way, because now I have to say that all the time.
No, it's absolutely true.
And if you graduate something that clearly isn't for you and you start a job that isn't for you, you will be a miserable person because I consider myself to be a well-traveled man. I've seen places. And it doesn't matter where you are or what you do for a living. If it's not for you, you'll be miserable. And you would, if you're like a single man or a single woman, that's, I guess, okay, kind of. But once you have a family, that negativity, that craziness is going to be transferred there. There'll be nothing but hell. So people really should know themselves. And that's actually why I am gathering all those examples.
Yeah.
And
No,
I really
you're
want to highlight
absolutely.
something. That's why I asked you when in China, because I
Mhm.
assumed that it was in the 90s, but I just wanted to hear it. Now, before this heavy industry, because right now China is like insanely industrialized, but back then it wasn't. And you also mentioned the wilderness. And when you are in that situation, it's quiet. And once it's quiet, you can reflect on yourself. This is why I personally believe that COVID was, of course, for those that didn't die, that had its uses and it wasn't all bad because the world was way too dynamic. It was spinning out of control. And that hit the brake right there. So it slowed us down a little bit. It allowed us to reflect on things that, well, I guess on things that were for us. And that was for everybody that I knew. I haven't met a person whose life was absolutely perfect and was going on the way it should. So that kind of quietness, either 27 days or 29 days in the wilderness, or in a place that's not that crazy industrialized, that really, it's like it heals the soul. About what is now at the end of, we're at the end of February, but a little bit before New Year, I was at an event here and I met a young woman, very, very talented, very smart, incredibly educated young woman. I don't remember the name of the city, but it's the capital of South Korea. Seoul or
Oh,
something. I don't remember
so
it. Yeah. It was evening and she was looking at the moon. And I wanted to crack a joke of, you waiting for somebody or something? She's like, I have never seen the moon like that. Like, what do you mean? And turns out that it's so crowded, and even during the night, the infrastructure is hot. Like there's always movement, and the skies aren't clear. So I mean, I am in a capital city, but it's nothing compared to what they have down there.
right.
And
Korea's pretty crazy.
yeah, so that kind of a thing to slow down a little bit, to review and to observe, I think this is incredibly important.
Yeah. And for those listeners again who'd like to understand that perspective you gain from nature, you could pick up a copy of my book. I'll send you the link. You
A
can
link
post
will
it.
be in the description of the video.
Yeah, I'll send you a link to the book as well. But I completely agree with your point that what's really valuable, I mean, money is valuable, but it's also the
Yeah.
time. Those 4 years, if you're just partying and wasting time and dragging your feet, there's a huge opportunity cost if later in your life you realize, hey, I became, I don't know, I use your example. I became an accountant, but I wish I had become a veterinarian. That was really my dream. And now you're stuck. You have very difficult choices because you may have gotten a family, you may have bought a house, you may be, you know, kind of invested in your life as an accountant, but you're still dreaming about that life as a veterinarian. And now to stop your job, to, put the stress of finances perhaps on your wife or your husband and go back to school for 4 years. Now that is expensive. It may not cost anything in Europe to go back, but it's or it may be affordable, but is it affordable when you have to put your life on hold? So
Yeah.
there's a huge opportunity cost to changing direction. It is much, much better to know what you want to do before you invest those 4 years in college. And I would tell young people who are starting out, get a job in what you want to do an internship. Um, if you don't know what you want to do or you have no clue, explore, travel, go places, go hiking. Um, I don't know, uh, follow your whim. Usually, even if you can't articulate what it is you want to do, your instinct takes you in certain directions. And if you just follow your instinct, you're like, wow, I've never been to Paris. I'm so curious about Paris. Go. Now, Paris may not be the answer to your question, but you may run into a guy in Paris who you have an interesting conversation with, and they tell you about how they're designing some new computer chip, and something clicks in your head, and you're like, I could do that. That sounds fun. Well, then go explore that. Take an internship in that industry, find out more about it. And when you have a sense, now you're never going to be 100% certain. This is the thing about life, and I'll come back to that in a second. But when you've got a calling, something that's telling you, yes, I want to explore this, follow it. That's when you should go to school. That's when you should follow it. Now, that doesn't mean your life is planned. All right.
Yeah.
I've gone through so many direction changes in my life. When I started, I wanted to do computer programming. Then I got into biology and chemistry, physics, and then I got into nature and writing. I mean, and I went off to China in the middle. My life has been many directions, but I've loved it. I've loved all the different directions I've gone. And every time something new is called to me, I've explored it. I've followed it. And when I found it was something I wanted to do, I stuck with it. When I found, oh, I don't like this, well, then I could write it off and say, okay, I've tried that and that wasn't fun. That wasn't what I wanted to do. Um, but you have to try it. And like you say, if you get yourself into a job that you don't like, you're in a career or a marriage or something, it's hell. It's miserable to be stuck somewhere that you don't like. And that takes bravery, that takes energy, that takes reflection. But you've got to just jostle yourself out of whatever that hole is and go out there. So, you take some time off, you travel or do whatever you need to do, but you don't want to stay in that rut. And it's a challenge. It's a real challenge, but the rewards are huge because you're only given one life to live. You only have one chance to walk this planet, and you should be happy doing it. You should, really, really find what's calling you. And it's a very important message that you're sharing here.
Thank you, and that's why I'm doing it. And also, there's the element of the ego. Although I always knew what I was going to do, but I always knew what I'll be doing, for now, because nobody knows. And as you said, we all had this internal desire. Like, for example, when I was a kid, I really wanted to be a garbage man. It's not too late, but I'd rather stay in the accountant field. Um,
But
a
you never
very,
know. You
say
you
again?
never know. You
Yeah,
just
you
never
never
know.
know. I
Okay.
am joking here and there, but
You're
it is.
you're
I'm using
joking, but
satire.
But look what can happen in life, okay? You're doing accounting and somebody may hire you from a sanitation company and they may say, we have this amazing position to set up a sanitation plant in, I don't know, Nigeria. And you're like, wow, Nigeria, I read the history of that country. I really want to go there. And suddenly you find yourself doing this thing that you've always dreamed of with your talents in a new place, in a new world.
I have the perfect example for that. When I started in the company that I work at right now, I said there was another guy, again an accountant, but he was for a different team. So that was about 5 years ago. We started together, both accountants in financial departments, right? About a year later, he met a very beautiful, very talented Greek woman. They got married. They moved to Greece.
There you go.
The company is international, right? It's huge. They're like 500,000 employees over there. So he was able to remain to be at a similar position, but in Greece, not here. And turns out that this girl's father is the captain of a boat, a ship, a small ship.
Hmm.
And he also works for that company. He moves the goods from Greece to Italy. Now he's a deputy captain of that boat. He's no longer an accountant.
Yes.
So
And it's,
you never know what life's gonna bring, but you also have to, I believe, of course, and correct me when I'm wrong, because I have this thing here. Every single guest of mine is way wiser than I am. So correct me when I'm wrong. You're no exception, of course. I personally believe that one should do just one step at a time, and what's next, and to forget the ego. Because I was in that situation. A very dear friend of mine gave me as a gift, an attendant for 1 year for CCNA Cisco routing system, I think it was called. It's basically how to navigate the network, and it sounded pretty cool, and it sounded very interesting. And I passed the test, I aced it. And once you do, you're like hardware architecture. It sounds
Mhm.
pretty fancy, right? It sounds pretty awesome. So I actually left the field of economics and I went over there. It was in a customer support center working with that. Lord, that was one of the most miserable 4 months I've ever had in my life. It was disgusting. It was terrible. But I was a hardware architect, right? So it was pretty cool. But my ego didn't allow me to admit that this wasn't for me. And thankfully, I have, one of those real friends that actually always tell you things that as they are. That no sugar on that, nothing.
Yep.
And you're like, I've never seen you so miserable. We should go to see Tony. Like, I'm using the name Tony. I don't want to dox people. So why would we want to? Well, why would I go to Tony? I don't like the guy. He don't like me. Yeah, he hates you. And once he see how miserable you are, he'd be very happy. Like, get out of my home.
Yeah,
So
no, sometimes we have to listen to our friends.
yeah,
Our friends sometimes see us more clearly than we do. And
yeah,
if your friends are telling you you're not looking happy, that's a voice you should listen to. Inner voices too. Sometimes I guess it's just the voice of opportunity. Every now and then something will come along, something that just grabs you, something surprising. And I think those of us who really thrive, those who really enjoy life, know when they hear that little voice to follow it. And even if it takes you out of comfort, even if it takes you into the wilderness or China or into something different, follow it. Now you may
yeah.
not like where you go, and that's still a lesson, but how much worse to be sitting at 80 years old wishing you had listened to that voice when you were younger. That would be a tragedy. So when you hear that call of opportunity, when something surprising comes along that grabs you, don't second guess yourself. Don't say, well, I don't know. I've still got him. Just go. Just try it. Figure out there's always a way to do it. Figure out how to follow it and see where it leads. Those are the things that just take us into new places and wonderful things in life. I mean, like my journey into the woods, I didn't know where that was going to take me, but it completely transformed, what I do in life now. And I if I could go back and do it again, I would 100%. It's fantastic. So always listen to that little voice, whether it's your friend or your wife or just something inside you. If something's saying, I think I should do it. Absolutely. That would be my number one advice because I
That's
think
a very good
inside,
advice. And
yeah,
not to mention, I've noticed that this little voice that you call it, I call it intuition, and I'm trying always to trust it because I view intuition as something that is a gift from thousands and thousands and thousands of years of mistakes made by previous. It's like a reflex, like
yes.
when something scares you, you duck. That doesn't it can be a dog that's tied up to a pole, but you still dog. That's the reflex. That's self-preservation instinct.
Well,
Again,
I think
and it's
deep
one of the
down,
rules here on the program. I don't talk about politics, but it's a good example. You put on the news and you see a public figure. I love that example because everybody can relate to it. And you see a public figure giving a speech, and there's this voice at the back of your head, like, this guy is full of it. He doesn't even believe what he's talking about. And it doesn't matter what this is applicable for everybody, but when you have this instinct, this little voice at the back of your head, you really should trust it because it will rarely lead you to a bad path.
yes, yes, I agree. And I think we second guess and we spend too much time up here, and we miss what's really in our heart. It's almost like our minds and our hearts are in conflict. And in the modern world, we have learned to listen to the noise of the mind so much more than the clarity of the heart. But every now and then, the heart is telling you something with those little voices, or your best friend, or wherever that's coming from. You read something in a magazine and it catches your attention. Don't just ignore that. Don't just go back to work. Put that magazine somewhere where you can really think about, maybe that's something I should be paying attention to, because it's those little moments that really will take you to the greatest places.
I love one of the examples that you gave, and I know this is just an example, but it's a pretty good one. Like you go to France, you meet you get to know somebody, you get into this discussion. Now, the fact that your instinct tells you to go to a certain place, just follow it, because if it really wasn't for you, your instinct wouldn't click. It clicks only when it's for you. And I really adore that example because I've been in a similar situation 4 or 5 times by now, and it's amazing and
It,
it's
it is
life
amazing.
changing. One of the reasons, there are multiple reasons, of course, why I even started this program, but there was this neighbor of mine, very, very good man, like very decent human being, pure as a child, but he's just so like ridiculously stupid, like on a genetic level stupid, that every cell in this man's body is just stupid. And I'm not insulting him. He got to be a reporter in a neighboring country. I say, how did you end up being a reporter? You barely had to make 2 sentences together. How does that even happen? Anyway, well, why don't you make your own program and stuff? I was like, well, that's not a bad idea. So that's one of the reasons I started it. But everything can goes to an, and I'm not insulting the man, by the way, just how it is. But yeah, everything you do leads to something else, and it's truly remarkable to see it. It's like you can see a flower blossoming over and over again. It's just pretty good.
Yes. And those moments, like going to France, you don't know why it's calling you, but it may be because you were supposed to meet that person. And I mean, I don't want to speculate on nature and higher powers, but maybe there's something in the universe that brings us together,
Yep.
gives you that voice, and you're meant to follow it. And if you don't, you've just missed that whole chance in life. So always listen to that voice. You never know when it's going to be there, but when you hear it and it strikes you, pay attention. Those are the changes, those are the turning points in our lives, and following those will just give you it's fantastic. That's all
Fulfillment.
I can say. Yes.
I couldn't agree more. And with that said, it was an absolute pleasure and an honor to be with you and to speak with you. You're like a walking encyclopedia. So I guess we should do this again. I guess I should have you for part 2, 3, or 4, because this was incredibly interesting, incredibly useful, and an amazing conversation. Please don't forget to give me the links so that I can put them in the description below. My main viewership is on LinkedIn. Other other social media as well, but mostly on LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure people would be interested in that.
Sure. I appreciate you having me, and I'll send you a link to my book.
Many thanks and have a remarkable week ahead.
You too. Thank you, Danny.
Guys, I hope this one was useful. Please follow the channel on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, Gap, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Ring the bell and all the good stuff. Have a nice week ahead, and I'll see you next Sunday.